Hello, everybody. My name is Mimi Turner. I'm the head of EMEA and Latin America for the B2BI at LinkedIn. I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce my colleague, John Lombardo, who is our global head of research, and he's going to talk you through how B2B Brands Grow, which was a landmark piece of work we did with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute.
Great to be here at F Week. I'm delighted to present our latest research, How B2B Brands Grow, done in partnership with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. My name is John Lombardo. I'm the global head of research at the B2B Institute at LinkedIn. Let's get into the presentation. Most of the work here leads me to conclude that every brand has a brand awareness problem. This is obviously quite a grandiose claim, but I do believe, and I'm convinced that every brand does have a brand awareness problem. You could say maybe small brands have a brand awareness problem. I can understand that, but surely big brands don't have a brand awareness problem. But I'm here to tell you that even big brands like Salesforce have a brand awareness problem. It's somewhat hard to believe. Salesforce has this famous iconic logo with the cloud. They invented the category of cloud in some ways. They have the world's biggest conference called Dreamforce. 135,000 people descend on San Francisco. And they've got a $267 billion market cap and this famous Salesforce Tower that crowns the San Francisco skyline. So how in the world could this big, massive, well-known brand have a brand awareness problem? It's a good question. It's a good question. How in the world could a $267 billion company possibly have a brand awareness problem? For that, we turn to Salesforce itself and to Colin Fleming. Colin gives us the answer. He says, people have heard of Salesforce, but few people knew how we could help their business grow. We realized we actually had an awareness problem. So Salesforce has an awareness problem. The reality is that the way we think about awareness today is wrong, and it leads big brands to not understand that they have an awareness problem when they actually do. Most brand awareness questions today ask you, when you think of the CRM category, which brands come to mind? And that's triggering off of the category. And then it essentially just means people repeat the biggest brand, Salesforce or Microsoft or Oracle, whomever it is. But realistically, that is not the right question to ask. It's a very one-dimensional question, and it's very focused on the brand. Which brands do you think of? There's a layer above this, which is salience. And salience is really just top of mind or first to mind. And it's just, if you look at the 100 responses to the brand awareness question, which brand was mentioned first most often? That doesn't really tell you anything either. It just tells you the biggest brand in the category. But to grow your brand, you need to be linked to more situations. You don't just need people to know your brand name. You need to know, as Colin said, what you can do for their brand, which situations you can help them in. And that requires a fundamentally different way of thinking. It's called mental availability. Mental availability isn't asking about the brands it's asking the customer about the situations that are most important to them. And then in those situations, which brands come to mind? So it's fundamentally a flip from being brand-centric to being customer-centric. Some of you who are familiar with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute will understand this as category entry points, but it is moving away from the idea of being top of mind or first to mind and moving towards the idea of being share of mind or winning share of mind. This is ultimately Salesforce's problem. They are top of mind, but they don't have enough share of mind. So in the end, what really matters is mental availability. And I love mental availability. It's a very mathematical way of thinking about marketing and advertising. And it's about increasing the probability your brand comes to mind in different buying situations. And we'll spend a bit of time talking about those buying situations. But in the end, I really love the idea of category entry points and buying situations, and that being the focus, because it focuses on the buyer and the buyer's needs. It doesn't focus on the category and the brand names. It's a much more customer-centric way of thinking. So how might you use this insight around mattering or coming to mind in different situations as being the most important thing? Because as a reminder, the biggest brands becomes they come to mind in the most situations. You think of McDonald's for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner. You think of them for dessert and for coffee. You think of them for chicken and for beef. Because McDonald's has so many different locations with so many different options, they just come to mind in more situations. That's why they're the biggest brand in the market. But how do you go about identifying those situations? You use what is called the W's framework to identify the key situations, key category entry points. These can be things like, why do you buy? And a lot of this has to do with, I want to get promoted, Or how do I feel when I buy? Am I nervous? Am I excited? Is it about achievement? What is kind of the feeling and emotion? When do you do it matters, especially in B2B? Is it the end of the financial year? Do you need to spend your budget before the end of the month? Are you doing it as part of a planning process? When are you doing it is important to understand. While doing digital transformation, we also talk about some of the things that matter, to our clients and what our brand can help our clients do, right? So there's broader kind of themes even within a specific topic like digital transformation. Who else is involved in the buying process? We talk a lot about the customer or the buying committee or the customer committee. And you also understand who else is important to the process. Is it different departments like finance? Is it the boss? Is it the board? And then also you want to think about what do people buy the product or service with? So for example, they buy Teams as part of a bundle, with Microsoft Office, or does Zoom often get bundled with Slack? You would want to think about all these different things and find ways to build links between the other products you might be bundled with. So all of these ideas around the W's, you essentially want to come up with a list of questions that are, you ask customers, let's say 25, 30 customers, you want to identify the most common situations. Then you want to make sure that you reflect or repeat those common situations back to your audience so they link you with those situations and buy you in those situations. The idea of wanting share of mind, not top of mind, is a way to think about it. What you find is the more situations you are linked to, that's what's called mental market share. The more situations you're linked to, the higher your market share. So we like to say win the mind to win the market, or mind share determines market share. This is a mental availability map, which is based on a lot of the work Ehrenberg Bass does. It's for the insurance category down in Australia, but you could do this in the UK, you could do this in the US, you could do it anywhere. And fundamentally, this is a very quantitative, very mathematical approach to brand management and to thinking about mind share as a leading indicator, potentially, of market share. The metrics you would use are memory metrics. So one is just out of all of the different brands that come to mind in situations, how often do you come to mind? Do you come to mind 40% of the time? If so, you're likely to have 40% market share. You also want to understand for the top 10 or 15 situations, how many of them are you linked with? So what's your penetration around specific situations? And then in specific situations, you also can understand, am I first? Am I second? Am I third? And that just tells you, where to compete and where not to compete. If you are in first, you may want to protect that. If you're in third and it's a distant third to other competitors, it may not make sense to compete on that specific situation in your advertising messaging. The Salesforce campaign that they launched in 2019 called Trailblazer helps to explain how Salesforce is using the ideas of mental availability and category entry points to try to penetrate verticals they are not well known in, where people do not understand how Salesforce can help grow their business. So they're explaining just kind of at a broad level, what we do is we bring companies and customers together. And then they're obviously not just a general message, but there are vertical messages, but still very broad vertical messages. Government, for example, is likely not a highly penetrated market for Salesforce. So they're just explaining to people in government, you can use us in government to bring citizens and government together. Manufacturing, another probably lightly penetrated vertical. And so they're explaining to manufacturers that they bring manufacturers and customers together. So it's all just about increasing mental availability, increasing situational awareness. We've done a bunch of different research with Ehrenberg Bass called How B2B Brands Grow. I'm going to talk about 3 things today: double jeopardy law, 95/5 rule, and brand rejection. All of them in some way reinforce why we believe mental availability is the most important idea in marketing today. We'll start with the idea that Ehrenberg Bass is most famous for. It's called the double jeopardy law. And we'll just start with a myth. And the myth here is that B2B brands grow by increasing customer loyalty. We confirmed this belief with a survey to about 3,000 global marketers on LinkedIn. And we found that 65% of B2B marketers believe customer loyalty is more important than customer acquisition. And this is very common in B2B. So if the myth is that firms grow through customer loyalty, the evidence, the data from Ehrenberg Bass would suggest the opposite. Brands don't grow through customer loyalty, they grow by acquiring new customers. Professor Jenny Romaniuk, in a paper that we wrote together, said there is a primary strategy to grow in B2B, and it is new customer acquisition to expand the size of your customer base. You must acquire new customers in order to materially grow your revenues. You cannot grow solely through customer loyalty. There's a whole lot of evidence on this. This is just one piece of evidence in B2B. But as you can see here, this is in banking. You can see that the brands that have the highest penetration, here Barclays has 41% penetration and TSB has 10% penetration. Brands that have higher penetration also see more products purchased. So Barclays has 41% penetration and 5.7 different products purchased. You can see TSB has a much lower penetration, 4 times lower, and they also have correspondingly lower number of products purchased. So what you're seeing here is that it's not loyalty that determines growth, it is growth determines loyalty. Bigger brands get bigger loyalty. And you can see here, if you look at the brown line, the smaller a brand gets, the less loyalty it has. What's interesting is this idea of double jeopardy. Obviously, it started in B2C. It turns out that it replicates in B2B as well. There's data not just on business banking, like I just showed you. There's data on coronary stents. There is data on aviation fuel. There is data on cement producers. All sorts of small niche B2B categories exhibit the law of double jeopardy. And I saw this recently, which just was another application of double jeopardy I thought was quite interesting. In the US, they asked a panel of folks which streaming service has the best original programming. And you can see Netflix got the vote here, or the top vote at 39%. Amazon Prime came in second. What's interesting about this is the perception here, who has the best original programming, is actually just a reflection of the penetration. So the biggest brands have the best perception. So penetration not only determines loyalty, as I showed you on the last slide. On this slide, you can see penetration also determines perception as well. In fact, Andrew Ehrenberg, and of course the Ehrenberg Bass Institute is named after Andrew Ehrenberg and Frank Bass. Andrew Ehrenberg has what, in my mind, is maybe the most important quotation in all of marketing and advertising. He says, of the 1001 variables which might affect buyer behavior, 999 usually don't matter. Many aspects of buyer behavior can be predicted from penetration. So penetration is really the thing to optimize for, the thing to focus on. If you focus on penetration, you get all sorts of other goodies. You get loyalty, you get thought of as being innovative, as being socially responsible, as being high quality original programmers. So everything's predictable from penetration. And the advice actually in this case from Ehrenberg Bass is what's called targeting the category. And we like the idea of targeting the category as well, as a way not just to grow new customers, but also to retain your old customers or your current customers. One of the mistakes that most people make in the world of B2B is they target too narrowly. They just target senior people at very specific companies. But our data, in fact, shows that every year about 10% of an industry turns over. So in 10 years, you'll have entirely new people within any industry. When you target broadly, you end up reaching not just the current decision makers, but the future decision makers. So you're always reaching the people who matter in the category. That helps you to manage churn and stay a market leader over time, or to grow from maybe second or third to becoming a market leader over time. When you target too narrowly, when you just target senior people and you ignore junior people, what happens is you end up not reaching the future decision makers, the future buyers, and in 10 years' time, nobody knows who you are anymore and you're a small brand. So target everybody in the category to grow penetration continually and to manage churn continually. So reach these young people, reach the agency director before she becomes the marketing director or the CMO, reach the IT, the finance manager before he or she becomes the CFO, and reach the junior IT person before she becomes the senior IT decision maker. That's the idea here. So that was the law of double jeopardy, or the double jeopardy law. Very famous idea from Ehrenberg Bass, and very contrarian idea. We'll talk a little bit about now how you go about marketing and advertising to make sure that you grow your penetration. And the 95-5 rule is very important here. So the myth here would be marketing works by reaching buyers who are ready to buy today. As you could recall from the first idea, law of double jeopardy, the myth there was companies grow mostly through customer loyalty. And here the myth is that marketing works by reaching buyers who are ready to buy today. We saw in the same survey I spoke about earlier, 96% of marketers expect immediate results, and very few marketers measure the long term anymore. So that's the myth. What's the fact? The fact is that most people are not in market today, which means that marketing primarily works by reaching buyers not who are ready to buy from you today, but the opposite, who are not ready to buy from you today. This is quite a bit more counterintuitive than people realize, but the evidence backs it. If you look at computer buying in B2B, so LinkedIn, for example, buying from Dell in order to give every one of its employees a computer, you see that Companies only buy new computers for their employees once every 4 years, which means 75% of that time, companies are not in market, they're out market. They're not going to buy from you today. Similarly, in B2B banking, companies don't change banks all that often, maybe only once every 5 years, which means 80% of the time companies are out market. They are not ready to buy today. And even in categories like basically vehicles or cars, people only buy a car on average once every 10 years, which means 90% of the time, people are not ready to buy today. They're not in market. This data is what underpins the 95-5 rule idea from John Dawes, another professor we worked with. I think fundamentally marketers just think they control a lot more of the buying journey than they do. They think that they can put an ad in front of you and move you into the market or move you down the funnel, but the funnel is fundamentally the wrong mental model. It's very brand focused. It suggests kind of that I can put an ad into the market and I can make you aware of me and I can make you familiar with me and I can make you consider me and I can make you buy me. It's all about me, 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 the brand, the brand, the brand. It's the wrong way, in my opinion, to think about it. A better way to think about it is not top of funnel or bottom of funnel. It is in market and out of market. That is a better mental model because it actually is customer focused. The customer is either in the market for a product or service or they're not. So they're in market or they're out market. And the evidence from John Dawes shows that on average, most people are not in market. Maybe 5 to 10% of people are in market. Maybe in certain categories, it can be a bit higher, like 15 or 20%. But the ultimate point is most people, the majority of people, 80 to 95% of people are out market or not going to buy from you today. And so it makes more sense, of course, to focus on them and to prime them so that you have a durable and growing stream of future cash flows, of future sales. There's far too much focus on the short term today. Most customers are not there. Most customers are in the longer term. There should be more focus there. I think many people at this conference will be familiar with the creeping short-termism in our industry, and it is a problem. And this explains why not to be short-term. You can go out of business in 5 or 10 years just by focusing on the short term and ignoring the longer term. And John Dawes does make this point quite nicely. He says you can't just target in-market buyers. To grow a brand, you need to advertise to people who are not in the market now, so out-market buyers. So when they do enter the market, your brand is the only one they know. In our paper with John Dawes, there's a lot of great evidence showing that people mostly just buy from familiar brands, famous brands, brands that have spent money advertising to those customers well before they ever needed to buy that brand. So you kind of need to build fame and familiarity. Otherwise, you don't get the click, you don't get the sale, you don't get kind of the cash. So it's actually the primary job is actually out market advertising. It is not in market advertising. It's reaching people who are not going to buy from you today. People don't really do a lot of thinking, even in high involvement purchases. Some other evidence from John Dawes showed that people on average only look at less than 2 banks when they're buying from a bank or working with a bank. Most people just buy from their current bank. And even the people who claim to shop around, those folks still most of the time end up with their current bank. So you've got to reach people well before they've made a decision so that when they ultimately make the decision, you win the sale, you win the account, and then you have a chance to keep them over time. But it's always about reaching new people who are making new decisions. And if you're not one of the 2 brands that has reached that consumer or that buyer well before they needed to buy from you, you're probably not going to win that sale. You can't just target people precisely or retarget people, after they've seen an ad. You've got to actually market to them years in advance, not minutes in advance. A money line here or a memorable line might be you want to be memorable, not clickable. Reach people who are out market with memorable advertising. So when they do enter the market, and they do put themselves in market, you don't do that. When they do enter the market, they think of you first, or you come to mind. It's all about building memory. It's not about buying clicks. Being memorable does require a different approach. It's in some ways the aim for sales approach versus the aim for fame approach. If you're trying to get the immediate sale, you have a rational message, something like, save 15% in 15 minutes. If you're trying to aim for fame, you show a gecko or you show a meerkat and you say, I am in the insurance category and you can buy insurance from me. If you're trying to get the immediate sale, you have narrow targeting. If you're aiming for fame, you have broader targeting. And if you are aiming for sales, you track things like marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, stuff like that. And if you are aiming for fame, it's more the memory metrics I talked about earlier. It could be mental market share or situational penetration, things like that. The Trailblazer campaign I talked about earlier, it's very clear that it's reaching people who do not buy Salesforce today and are not likely to buy Salesforce today, those very critical out-market buyers who deliver you the future growth and the future cash flows. It's just explained to them, hey, you don't need to worry about buying from us today, but we bring customers and companies together. We want you to know that in the future. Hey, government folks, you don't need to buy us today, but when you do think about managing your relationships with your citizens, think about buying us. And then manufacturers, you don't need to buy from us today. In fact, you're not going to, but in the future, when you do need something to manage your customer relationships, please think of Salesforce. And that is how priming folks well in advance leads to sales down the road. And it's the primary job I would argue that most marketers should be doing, whether it is brand marketing or performance marketing or lead generation. It's really all about building mental availability. The final idea is called B2B brand rejection, and it is a very entertaining take on the brand awareness problem or the mental availability problem. The myth here would be that brand rejection or brand hate is actually very common. Many people in PR and comms really worry about brands doing something wrong and people hating them so much or disliking them so much or being so annoyed by them that they will not buy from the brand. We see this through our data as well, through the survey we ran. And this is the same survey for all 3 data points. And the survey essentially showed that marketers think perception is more important to growth than awareness. They worry a lot about the downside, and I would say they should worry more about the upside. Because the fact is that brand rejection or brand hate or brand annoyance is actually rare. People mostly just don't think about brands at all. 9 in 10 people would not actively reject a brand in banking or insurance. The reality is they don't think about those brands. They don't have any opinion about those brands whatsoever. They are completely neutral. So 9 in 10 folks would not actively reject it. There is, of course, the 1 in 10, the 10%, who say that they would reject a brand. But if you actually ask them a series of additional questions, you will find that 2 in 3 of the folks who claimed not to be willing to buy a brand would actually consider buying a brand again. So there's just very little evidence that brand rejection, brand hate, brand annoyance is a real thing. The problem isn't you have so much awareness that anybody would hate you or reject you or be annoyed by you. The problem is that you have no awareness whatsoever. You have not brand awareness, you have brand unawareness. This is fascinating data, again, in the B2B banking category in the UK. And it shows that even enormous banks like Barclays and HSBC, they have almost twice as many people who are unaware they exist as would reject them. So even the big brands have a brand awareness problem. And of course, the smaller brands, Metro, Yorkshire, Deutsche, they have an enormous brand awareness problem. They have almost 7.5 times as many people who don't even know they exist as would actively reject them. So fundamentally, people do not think about brands. They're not even aware your brand exists. Brand unawareness is your problem. Jenny Romaniuk will take it home for us here with this wonderful quotation. She says, even the most well-known B2B brands in the category had more potential customers unaware of the brand than actively rejecting it. The ratios are much higher for smaller brands. The real problem is brand unawareness. Every brand, no matter how big, no matter how small, has a brand awareness problem. The big job is always building mental availability. Which takes us to our close. The idea is, if mental availability matters, another way to put it is win the mind, mental availability to win the market share. It's all about being remembered, and you cannot spell remembered without RMB. So you want to be the brand that is most mentally available. To do that, you reach people, reach everybody in the category. You actually run messaging that comes out of the buyer's mind. You find out what situations, what ideas, what emotions are important to them, and you play that back to them in your creative and your messaging, and then you brand it using excellent distinctive assets. So reach everybody in the category, especially out market buyers. This is really easy to do on LinkedIn. We have a free tool called Campaign Manager. Go figure out exactly how many people are in finance, how many people are in marketing, how many people are in tech, how many people are in manufacturing, how many people are in construction. You name the industry or the category, we can tell you how many people are in the UK, in the US, in Chile, in Argentina, in Latvia. It's a wonderful tool, free tool to help you reach everybody in the category. You want to message using category entry points. Again, link the brand to the buyer's needs. Don't talk about yourself, talk about what the buyer needs. Salesforce is generally explaining to people, hey, we bring your company and your customers closer. If you're in government, we do the same with you and your citizens. And if you're in manufacturing, we do the same with you and your vendors. So this is all about thinking about how the customer can use the product to get closer to his or her customers. Branding. Under branding is one of the biggest problems in B2B. Most creatives poorly branded. Salesforce does not have this problem. They have this very distinctive look and feel, this very memorable, iconic logo now, and of course, the Astro character, the human raccoon hybrid. It is the Disney-ification of B2B. It is wonderful branding. It is impossible to forget it is Salesforce or not recognize that it's Salesforce. And you got to brand stuff. Buyers can only buy the brands they remember. By linking Salesforce to more situations, we can see how they are using mind share to drive market share. Salesforce has done an excellent strategic job of brand management and brand marketing here. And of course, it has accelerated their growth, the growth of a product that has already got great product market fit. So in closing, do not get distracted by other objectives. The main objective is mental availability, and you need to build mental availability to grow. You can follow the double or jeopardy law, which says focus on penetration, not loyalty, to grow. You can follow the 95-5 rule, which says focus on out-market future buyers, not in-market current buyers, to grow. And then you can follow the brand rejection concept, which is do not worry about the downside. Instead, worry about the upside. Everybody has more brand unawareness than brand awareness. Building mental availability, building awareness tied to specific situations. That is how you grow. Thank you very much, F Week. It was wonderful to be here with you. Enjoy the rest of your evening or morning or wherever you are.